Hello and welcome to Spare Change News TV. My name is Sam Baltrusis. I am the editor-in-chief of Spare Change News. Joining me today is Amanda Michelle Gomez.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So Amanda wrote a story in her last edition of Spare Change News. She actually saw it for the first time. How was it seeing your article in the last edition?
It was amazing. I didn't know. I was in awe. I'm excited about all of this. So it was awesome. Yeah.
So her story was female trouble, and it was about the issue related to feminine hygiene products and the homeless related for women who are homeless. Now, how did you go about setting up the interviews for that story?
Well, I went the traditional route at first. I just spoke to local female women, like just women shelters. And, just did a lot of cold calls, was very, hi, I'm, Spare Change News reporter. But then from there, naturally I wanted to interview women who were experiencing this crisis. I wanted to speak with women to see firsthand, because what kind of tipped me off about this was a Huffington Post article that talked about women experiencing homelessness and how some women would go to the point where they would sell food stamps to pay for tampons, pads, any other feminine hygiene products. Right. So then I was like, all right, well, let's see how true this is. And I believe it, but I wanted to see, all right, let's speak to women who have had to do this. And I spoke with shelters, but because of, privacy issues, they couldn't, of course, give me names. So I thought, okay, well, let's just kind of go men on the street, women on the street, really, and talk to women experiencing homelessness in this. So yeah, it was very, just kind of, it wasn't exactly the easiest, because you just kind of have to go out and speak to people, which is kind of terrifying to certain human, but I did it, and I spoke, and it was awesome.
As a journalism instructor, one of the most difficult things with students is the man in the street interview. And you actually did man in the street, but it was exacerbated by the fact that you had to talk to homeless women on the street.
Right.
So you talked to Brittany, and that was a fantastic photo and interview with Brittany. How did that come about with the actual her telling her story?
Right, this conversation I had with Brittany. So I was walking around the Harvard Square Pit area, just kind of, I'd been there like couple times earlier that week, just trying to build up the courage to just speak with anybody. And I spoke to he was like this guy, he was passing out like flyers,
right.
And I was speaking with him at first and kind of just making small talk. And then he was telling me about a girl, how a woman, he had like kind of taken over her spot. Like she was she was panhandling, and he was passing out cards, and then she was upset at him because she felt that he was taking up like potential people who would like give her cash, right? And then he ended up like feeling bad and was like, I swear I'm not. And then he ended up moving from that spot, which is by the Gap alcove that I describe in my story. Anywho, he was like, can you actually give this to her? This like the spare change, because he felt terrible because he really didn't mean any harm, and they had gotten this altercation earlier that day. So I'm like, all right, fine, whatever. Like I walk over, it's Brittany, and I don't know that at the time. I'm like, okay, this girl, I canned her the spare change. And after that we start talking. She had this awesome like owl printed bandana, and I complimented it, and she was really nice. And then I disclaimed I'm a Spare Change News reporter. I'm actually writing a story about feminine hygiene products. And then she was passionate about it because this is an issue that clearly hit like close to home. So it was just like talking with any other woman. Really, it's actually it's a fun, refreshing conversation to have, because it's an uncomfortable situation first off, like talking about your period.
Yeah.
But then with her, it was just like, let's talk about it. Let's get a little uncomfortable. And it was fun. It was cool.
So this edition, Amanda Palmer's on the cover. It's actually almost sold out, so make sure you get your latest edition of Spare Change News. But the story again was fantastic.
Thank you.
And I think that what made it so fantastic was the fact that you did talk to Brittany. And also what I got from the story is that there is, because of the Huffington Post story, that there's sort of a surplus of feminine hygiene products at the shelters. However, they're not necessarily going to the shelters for those because of being embarrassed or whatever.
Right. Yeah. There's just like a stigma associated with shelters to begin with. It's, kind of a scary, you're afraid of getting mugged, you're afraid of getting, there are just and especially for a woman, this issue is kind of heightened because it's like, okay, I can also get like sexually harassed, all these, but then, there are female shelters, but even then there's, I spoke to several other women experiencing homelessness, and they were like, well, there's like this clickiness, and some people just don't want to go to shelters to get these products. So therein lies the issue. All this, all these tampons, all these pads in these shelters, but how do you kind of, and I spoke to a woman at Rosie's place, and she was saying, well, kind of outsourcing, like outreach, and like kind of go outside and like hand them out, but people are still kind of deciding what the best approach is, so ideally maybe tampons and pads could be free, so this this whole tobacco, this wouldn't be an issue, like, I need to go to a specific place to get this for free, but
sort of like the underlying theme of the story is also female homelessness, and I think that you kind of touched on it, the fact that there's so many men in the shelter system, and the women are definitely a minority. Sometimes the women are forgotten. Like, did you get that at all from the women that you talked to, like Brittany and the other woman that you talked to, that there was sort of more of an emphasis on services for men and not for women?
On the larger, yes and no. Yes, in that when like the larger the shelter, people just kind of become nameless to begin with. So it's like it's kind of like, okay, you're a woman, you're a man. It all kind of gets lost. But I specifically spoke to a lot of women's shelters, thinking that this should be a priority. So people weren't necessarily. Women weren't necessarily like forgotten because it was a women's shelter, right? The emphasis was on gender. But yes, you do see that in larger shelters, because everyone kind of becomes faceless in that, because there's you become like kind of a number in a data set rather than like a person, and with that.
Another thing, like I have seen as editor of Spare Change News, in working with the homeless women, there's a safety issue. So a lot of these women have come from violent situations, getting away from like domestic abuse. They could have lost their jobs. Have you, is that something? And obviously, you haven't talked to a lot of women about this, but I would love for you to be kind of focused on giving a voice to the women, homeless women, as you move forward with your stories. Because you did such a great job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's so difficult, because also in my story I emphasize how every woman's need is different. Like, not every woman can. So even not every woman uses tampons because there are trigger-related issues associated with that, and then not every woman uses pads. It really, and that's kind of the hard part to even you want to talk about women's issues, but what is it? There are so many different types of women, so therein lies the complication.
Well, something that and when you talked in the story, you actually you did talk about that it could be a trigger, and of course, this topic, when I was editing this story, I'm like, I don't really know much about this topic, but it's important to be candid, and I appreciate your candidness doing the story, because it's not an easy story to do.
Yeah. It wasn't. It's very uncomfortable. You make a lot of uncomfortable phone calls. I'm talking about periods. You help me with that, and it is uncomfortable. But it's kind of it's necessary, so I don't mind it.
So you are currently working on another story, and now we have another. You've focused on homeless women. Now you're focusing on drugs and the homeless population.
Right.
What are you finding currently? We're having a huge spike in deaths related to heroin and other opiates. Opioids. Is that the? There's a lot of deaths happening, and we have friends of friends who have passed away over the winter from drug overdoses. So what have you uncovered so far with the story that you're working on?
Right. Well, I don't want to give too much away because I want you guys to read it. But from what there was specifically this one organization, Hand Delivered Hope, and I spoke to a woman, Carol, and she shared a lot, and it was a very awesome, it was a situation that she was able to share with me. But anywho, she was talking about her own son, actually, who first became addicted to because it kind of always, from what I'm seeing, a lot of this is you're prescribed. They end up being prescription drugs you become addicted to, and then you're like, wait, this is expensive. I can't do this. So then it's all right, well, what's the cheaper alternative? And heroin tends to be that.
Right.
So that's kind of what Carol was sharing with me, and and it was her son, and it was this kind of hit home for her, and so she ended up another woman, Linnell, who started Hand Delivered Hope. We're like, okay, what's the best way to kind of change the stigma surrounding like addicts, because like it's always like, oh, how come you just can't stop, right? And no, there's not a lot of help. So they thought of Hand Delivered Hope, and what they do is they kind of go throughout the streets of Boston. They, like in downtown, just all over little spots, and they try to like find former or current addicts rather, who kind of took to the streets because either their family disassociated them, themselves with the person who's kind of, who's addicted to XYZ, and then so they're trying to right now kind of make sure that let these people know that someone cares. So this is just like a very interesting route. I've spoken with Hand Delivered Hope, and I've spoken with State Senator Flanagan, and it's been just a lot. This is really interesting because you only have to go through kind of the legal system and how this is working, but you also you want to find those personal stories. So it's been really. Yeah.
As someone who has done, I did a story one time about a man that was killed and talking to the parents. So is it hard not to get emotionally involved into the people that you interview, like the mother with a son who's an addict?
Right. I was very unexpected because I spoke to her thinking that I was just going to talk to her about this wonderful thing like she's kind of doing at the community, Hand Delivered Hope, and then she disclaims that, I don't know what they're going through, but I have an idea because I've kind of experienced it myself. And I was like, and it just kind of, I was taken aback, but then I have to remember, like, I'm a journalist, and I guess I'm a listener, so I kind of had to, like, remove my emotion from it, but not entirely, because I do empathize, I'm a human too. I'm a journalist, I'm a human. So it's you're right. It's very difficult. There's a lot of balancing required.
It's hard not. Having done this for years, it's hard not to be emotionally invested in the people that we talk to.
Yeah, it's definitely hard.
And so we are actually going to unveil a documentary. It's a short documentary. It's fantastic. This woman, her name is Diane Smith. She's doing a project for college, and Amanda's actually still in college as well.
Emerson College.
Yay, Emerson. But Diane was taking a class at Harvard. She went in the streets of Harvard Square in the Pit, the same area that you covered for Female Trouble.
Right.
And she did these amazing interviews with several homeless people, and we're going to unveil the documentary by Diane Smith. Amanda, it was a pleasure talking to you.
Great talking to you.
Thank you so much for being on Spare Change News TV.
Thank you for inviting me.
There are many causes for homelessness: unemployment or underemployment, physical and mental health issues, life-altering events such as the loss of a loved one, an inadequate foster care system, and war, to name a few. The City of Cambridge Division of Statistics reported as of 2014, over 500 people with no official residence lived on the streets in temporary shelters in Cambridge. There are only 2 shelters that service Harvard Square with 43 beds. 8 people were interviewed, only 3 are included in the documentary No Room at the Inn. The tone is serious as I share their realities of living on the streets in Harvard Square. On a brisk January day, I completed my first interview with a young musician where he lived. Could you talk about maybe where you're staying and how you're managing?
I usually stay on the streets, or train stations, or it depends. I try to move around and not keep it. I try to not really keep a pattern. It's just
yes.
Now
you told me you needed to be here 6 months. Could you explain that?
No, I just. In order for me to get a housing voucher, I need to wait at least 6 months.
In Cambridge?
Yeah.
Okay, and how long have you been playing?
I've been playing guitar and music for 17 years.
My name is Kevin. I've been homeless since 1994. I was placed into an apartment that I didn't get along with the neighbors. And instead of putting in for a transfer, I stopped paying rent, and I was evicted in March of 1994. My daughter was born in January of 1994. She turns 21 this year, and that's how long I've been homeless.
Can you tell me where you're living at night in the cold like this?
Well, I stay on some friend's couch. When I'm not there, I'm in the shelter down in Boston, what they call intake. They have a temporary shelter until they establish a new shelter that's opening. I was staying at the Long Island shelter, but they closed that down because the bridge that leads to Long Island shelter needs work on it, and it's dangerous to cross with the buses. So they closed that down. I'm in between staying on the friend's couch and staying in a temporary shelter.
But you are not sleeping out on the streets at all.
I try to avoid that at all costs because I know it's not healthy at all.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, I'm Robert O'Regan. I've been out here on these streets on Harvard Square for a few years now, ever since I got out of the military. I joined after high school when my father said it would probably benefit my life. And it did. It gave me structure, discipline, and everything I needed, but some of the things that happen in there aren't really good for us when we come back. I was witness the Ford shooting, got shot twice there. I'll tell you, it was 130 degrees every day. We carried over 100 pounds. You got your rattle gear, your flak vest, your helmet, which weighs 15 pounds, M16 that weighs most 8 pounds, and all the ammunition, which is another 20. So you in a 60-pound rucksack. So you got long sleeves, and that it was torturous. And all I wanted to do was make sure my friends got home to see their families. I didn't just do it for just the patriotism. My friends were going over there. I wanted to, and then I get out, and now I have all these problems, and I don't know how to deal with it. I go to the VA for help, and they can only help us so much. There's so much of us out here, almost veterans. It's unfair. I don't know how this happens to all of us, but it's almost, we all share very similar stories, and it's tough out here. It is.
How did you become homeless? How did you?
I got out, I did masonry, and because of my injuries, I hurt my L5, and I got my bullet hole in my leg, my back. I have been able to do construction like I was. I was a 21 Bravo engineer in the military station in Fort Worth, Texas, and I can't do construction anymore. And my mental state is, let's just say, not perfect.
As I wandered the streets, I listened to the voices of forgotten people we often pretend not to see. Occasionally, as I walked home from class, my interviewees would shout, "Have a good night. See you tomorrow. You need more footage, I'm here." I will be forever haunted by those who slept in doorways, with the snow blanketing their clothes and bags.
Welcome back to Spare Change News TV. Again, my name is Sam Baltrusis. I'm the editor-in-chief of Spare Change News. Joining me now is Andrew Warburton.
Hello.
Hey, Andy, how's it going?
Good. How you doing?
Good. So Andy was on the show before, and today we're going to actually, the underlying theme of this is sort of how to interview people who are homeless or formerly homeless. Mm-hmm. And something that you do, now with the questions with the documentary, first of all, what did you think of the documentary?
I thought it was really powerful.
It was powerful. Mm-hmm. And she was able to actually capture the emotion mm-hmm. on their faces with a high-def camera.
Yeah.
Now, with the questions now, a little bit, she asked questions like, how did you become homeless? Now, you don't ask those types of questions. Like, do you try not to ask those questions when you do interviews? He writes the last word column, which is on the last page of Spare Change News.
Yeah, what she's doing is similar to what I've been doing, interviewing the vendors, but I think that she's really meeting homeless people where they're at, but in the street, basically. So you can even hear all those street noises in the background.
Yeah.
So I think that what I've been doing is meeting people in quite a private situation. So I think that gives them the time to sort of really kind of open up quite a lot. I think it would be difficult to like go into the street and interview people and try to, you know, find out a lot about their life in that kind of environment.
Well, Diane was really, when she submitted the documentary for Spare Change News TV, she was really adamant about us keeping those noises because like
Yeah,
that is the
definitely,
reality of what they live in. And you had one gentleman who was a veteran and possibly could have PTSD. And imagine all those noises. And you know, that's something we'll probably talk about as we move forward with Spare Change News. Is PTSD is a huge issue, and it could be trauma that's caused. PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. Could have been caused in the shelter system. It could be why they ended up homeless. There's a lot of PTSD. Now, have you encountered that with the people that you talk to?
PTSD?
Yeah, well, just dealing with maybe, like, for example, like alcoholism is a symptom of PTSD. You actually use alcohol to self-medicate.
Well, yeah, one thing actually, I'm not sure if it's really related to PTSD, but the latest interview that will be in the newspaper that's coming up this Friday, Mark was talking a lot about alcoholism and mental health issues, and just sort of saying that even though all the resources are out there, there's a lot of resources out there. I mean, there could be more, but if you're suffering with something like an addiction or a mental health issue, it can sort of be really impossible to sort of take advantage of those resources. I think if you're, especially, if you have a drug or alcohol problem, I mean, it's hard enough to sort of make an appointment. Do you know what I mean? Like, get there on time if you're suffering with that kind of addiction. So let alone kind of having the persistence that you need to sort of take advantage of all these resources.
And Andy, so since he's last been on the show, we've had two of the vendors that you talked to, Joe M. and Alja Benjamin, and both of them said great things about your stories.
Yay.
So you're doing a good job. And so since then, it's been Tommy and it's been Mark coming up.
Yeah.
And so out of all the stories, do you feel like that there's been a shift? Because the earlier stories with Alja, there was more of a focus on, say, like their childhood and their upbringing. Have you noticed a shift in the stories at all since as you're
Definitely. I mean,
forward?
every single one is just like so different.
Yeah.
So Mark was emphasizing the sort of the addiction aspect, and then which not everyone has. And then Tommy is from Brooklyn, and he was talking about the kind of the sales aspect. Like he sold timeshare for 7 years in Cape Cod. So his approach to selling the paper is very much that of, you know, a salesman.
Right.
So he was giving a lot of insight into what it's like to sell the paper, why people buy the newspaper, which is basically, he thinks, to support the vendors. But he also said that the editorial content was important. It gave him sort of a link to people in the street to talk, sort of raise issues with them and talk to them.
Yeah.
You know, like things like Long Island and that.
Well, when I read the quote from Tommy that, you know, it's people don't buy the paper for the paper, they buy it for the vendors, I was like, what? But the truth is that is true. They do. There's a relationship with the vendors, but there's also the content. People are getting rave reviews with our content, thanks to people like Amanda Michelle Gomez and with you. So thank you so much for helping out with Spare Change News. It's been a pleasure working with you on this project. And we're going to actually end the show with a brief clip with Andrew Warburton interviewing Mark, who is our upcoming Last Word person that we're featuring. So thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you. Because that's pretty long avenue, isn't it?
Well, some of them, Park Street would be down by where Conway Park is.
Okay.
And that'd be at the Beacon Street end of Park Street.
So you've lived in Somerville basically your whole life?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have some general questions as well. One kind of question. Which living person do you most admire? It's kind of tricky.
There's so many, it's hard to pinpoint one specific individual.